never had something so real happen to me, and when I came back into my body, once the being or the angel, whatever you want to call it, said, become the purpose, I had that understanding. Immediately, I had this white light hit me, and the white light penetrated me. It became me, essentially. And in that light, there was information that I was meant to unlock. And the only way I could unlock that was through meditation and through, the opportunity to get my mind clear about my life. And it literally changed my whole life. That one experience, it wasn't just a spiritual shift. It was an entirety of my taste, what I want in life, how I feel about life. It's everything about me has changed.
The two biggest questions from my perspective in life: why are we here, and what happens after we die? Well, we examine near-death experiencers' accounts from all over the world, men and women, and their fascinating trips across the veil. We appreciate you joining us here on the channel, and don't forget, when you're done, if you wouldn't mind, to like, share, and subscribe, and leave us your comments.
Welcome to another edition of What's Death Got to Do With It, our podcast here on the Near Death Network on YouTube. We're glad you joined us. Each week we drop an episode talking with near-death experiencers, clinicians, and academicians about the near-death experience from the first-person viewpoint, also from the clinician standpoint and the academicians, how it's being verified now. These pioneers of consciousness have a lot to teach us, those of us who haven't had this experience. And I'm very happy to be joined now by Jeremiah Pospicil, who has been in touch with me for probably a couple of years now, Jeremiah, when I first saw your story, and glad to finally have you on.
Thank you, Mark. I'm so glad to be here. It's an honor to be here. I love the opportunity to talk to you over the years, and looking forward to our conversation today.
Let's talk about, before we get into your actual near-death experience, let's talk about how you were raised, what kind of spiritual home you had or not, and then talk a little bit about your time in the service too, because I think that plays into your whole story.
Sure. So I was born in San Diego, California, to a mother and father who had 4 children. I was the oldest of 4, and I grew up in a religious home, in a Christian home, and going to church on Sundays, and Wednesdays going to youth group or Awana. And I had a really great childhood growing up, but as I grew up, I kind of lost my connection with faith and with life. And I was just really rummaging through life, looking for any stronghold of life, So I dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety growing up. I didn't know what to do with it, where it came from. And so I struggled a bunch, with my mental health, I think, just trying to understand life itself. And then grew up and joined the military when I was younger. When I was 17 and a half, I signed the paperwork and got in when I was 18. Spent 8 years in the National Guard, got out, and then 8 years later got back in and got injured in the service, and ended up having multiple spine surgeries, and ended up getting medically retired out of the military. So it was an interesting experience.
Let's get back to the genesis. You had just talked briefly about your anxiety, getting lost and losing your way. What do you think prompted that? Was it peers, or was it yourself, or was it a combination of a lot of things?
I think it was definitely a combination of the environment and also my own understanding of myself. There was a moment growing up, I remember, when I was just in elementary school, maybe 5th, 6th grade. And I remember having my first experience with violence, and I got jumped from a skateboard and got beat over the head and just was bloodied. And I remember from that moment on, I couldn't be that nice, kind, loving person anymore. Like, I had to protect myself against the world. And I think that had a lot to do with my depression, because my whole life I had to try to become something in order to protect myself, and I didn't really understand what was going on. And I was being different people for different people, not having a grip on who I was. I wasn't content with that. And so I was fighting against that, inherent nature of kindness and love to try to project some kind of false reality. And I think that wears on my spirit. It wears on me because I'm highly empathetic, I'm intuitive, and I feel that energy. I feel the emotions deeply, and I just never had control over them. I let everything basically take control over me, and I lived in an emotional life.
So you became a people pleaser?
I did. Yeah, I did. It definitely was a people pleaser. Went out of my way to help people, just to try to make them happy, to just, quell conversations if they were going in a negative space. I didn't want to argue and stuff, for sure.
Well, and I think I went through a lot of that. I grew up in the 70s, so it was a party era, and your peers had a great influence on you. And so rather than say, no, no, man, let's don't do that, you just kind of went along for the ride. And fortuitously, I was able to escape unscathed pretty much. But let's now fast forward to 8 years ago. So you're on your motorcycle, you're a bike rider. You said that you had kind of a wanton look at things. You're a little bit reckless. You didn't have a helmet on. What happens in the actual accident?
So the accident, I was driving ridiculous on the motorcycle. First off, I wasn't being responsible. I didn't really care to live at the moment. I think previously I had a mental health breakdown. I had to check myself into a hospital because I wasn't wanting to be in existence anymore. And so at this point in my life, I had lost everything. I was just really didn't care about life, honestly, and went out and was just racing around. And I ended up trying to pull a wheelie on the bike. And the bike's really heavy. And one of the airbags kind of deflated a little bit on the suspension. And I turned my handlebars in response to that. And as I came down on the pavement, my front wheel, because it was not aligned going forward, ended up ejecting me off the bike, basically threw the bike and me up in the air. And it was just flying through the air. And then coming down, as I was coming down, I hit my head on the asphalt right near my bike. And the moment I hit my head, I went into this really black space, like I was blacked out. But I was totally consciously aware of myself, aware of my thoughts, aware of what was kind of going on, but I didn't see anything. It wasn't there. And I remember my first immediate thought in that situation was, man, this is how I die. Like, this is how I die. I've been wondering my whole life, consciously and subconsciously, how I was going to die. And now I know. And it was the most peaceful understanding I ever had in my life.
Well, and I know a lot of people have said, they have said what you said about that black void, and it's not necessarily what we would equate with black, the color black being a negative. It was very comforting. It was enveloping, and is that accurate? Would that be an accurate description?
It was definitely, it was almost like a void, like you're being coddled in this space, but the space is vast. There's no feeling of anything pulling on you. It's just you're free floating. It's almost like skydiving. If you've ever been skydiving before, there's a moment after you get past the rush of it where you're just kind of floating in this space. And it was very much like that. There's things out there, but you can't see them, you can't experience them. You're just in the nothingness. It seems like almost like a transitional period, it seemed like.
And from that period, you described fractals of light that you saw, or was there something in the interim that happened before you witnessed that?
Yeah. So at that moment, once I realized I was in this void, started noticing lights coming at me. And it was almost like I was in a Star Trek episode, and the lights were just coming at me like I was going through hyperspace. And they all just kind of started coming at me and just forming all around me, all the way down like a domino effect, where all these lights got into place. And it was like a bunch of little pixels in this tunnel. And each pixel had its own color, and each color had its own emotion. And every time I looked at a different color, I could feel the emotion of these colors. And it was interesting to me because I didn't know what was going on at this point. I knew I was still aware. I knew I could look around and see things and observe things, but I didn't have a body. I didn't have anything. And I noticed that once I started looking at these colors, it almost like sucked me into it. It almost brought me into the color. And I kind of backed off the first time it happened. I was like, I don't know what's going on. Like, this is kind of weird and scary. And then I realized I didn't know where I was anyway. So what did it matter? Why not go back in and just have an experience and see where it went, And I looked back at the color and I just got sucked back into this experience of my life. And the first experience was I was at a convenience store when I was probably 12, 13, I think. I don't remember the exact age, but I remember seeing this lady, and I remember saying hi to her. And when I said hi to her, the first time I actually did it, I don't remember what she was feeling. I don't remember anything about her. In fact, I hardly even remember the memory. It was
Mhm.
just an insignificant memory that came back to me. But as I was thinking through the experience, I was just saying, I said hi to her, and she looked over at me and she smiled and said hi back. And there was just something that connected to me to her in that moment. And in the near death experience, I remember feeling the experience of her and how it felt to be acknowledged, how it felt to be seen, how it felt to be appreciated. And there were so many different emotions inside of me that came from her and came from me at the same time. And I can kind of blend those two emotions together within this near death experience as I was in this light. And I started taking information from these experiences, like everything is connected. And every time we go through life, we have these different experiences with people, and everything just kind of runs into itself. There's no separation of anything. And I started going through more experiences as well, going down the color line and looking at these different life experiences. And each one of them was just teaching me, everything is connected. There's nothing separated, and we
So
have
this is your life review, essentially.
it really was. It was
Yeah.
going through my life. It wasn't going through the entirety of my life as much as like highlighting key points of my life that I really needed to sit down and look at and think about. And it was really amazing because I got to experience not just my perspective of it, but how I was projecting myself through the eyes of other people and how they saw me and how they viewed me and what the experiences did. There was another experience where I got into a fight with some guy over some milk, and he wanted to take my milk, and I didn't want him to take my milk because I was in love with milk, basically. And we ended up getting in a fight about it. The silliest thing, I was still in my teenage years. And in the near death experience, I went through that whole thing again, and I saw from not the eyes of someone who's trying to steal and take from me, but I saw it through the eyes of somebody who needed something, and I had something that I could help them with. And it felt, when I went through it in the near death experience, that he didn't have money or his family didn't have any way to provide, and he was just trying to do what he could for his younger siblings. And it really made me look at how I'm receiving people and how I'm looking at people and how my perception of people shifts and can change. I don't have to look at people through one set of lenses. I can look at them through any lens I want to. I have the ability and the authority to go through and like be aware of people and in their fullness and who they are. And that was really revealing to me as well. And so,
Well, oh,
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
let me just while I think about this, Anita Borgiani, who's had a remarkable near-death experience and is on the circuit and has her book is Dying to Be Me, has a great metaphor that I think is appropriate here. That when you go to see a resplendent um, tapestry in a museum and you're right here, you only see like four threads. But if you take 20 steps back, you see that we're all inextricably linked to one another. And is that kind of the sense that you got, that with that visceral reaction to what their reaction was, then you can have a better path going forward to ascertain what another person may be going through and be a little bit more circumspect before we smack somebody in the face over their milk. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is what it is. We're so caught up in our own lives that we can't see the interconnectedness of everybody's life within ours. There's no happenstance, there's no coincidence. Everything is a cause and effect in this universe. Everything happens from a cause, and the effect is displayed. And so there's no variables in our life. The only variable is our ability to perceive life in different positions and from different places. And so when we take a step back and see how everything is connected, not just how we're interacting with life, but how are we connected to everything, we can see that everything is working together. Everything is bringing us into the right places at the right times. Everything is happening for us and not to us anymore. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
big thing to remember, is that there's nothing that's out there that's not meant for us. There's no other way for it to possibly be. The human mind's interesting because it always goes into these places of the what ifs, the what could have beens. And those aren't even real. Those aren't real places. The only reality is what has actually happened. And the sooner that we
Right.
can understand that, the easier life becomes, because then we know that everything that's happened to us is meant to have happened to us. There's no way to possibly change it. And the only thing that keeps getting us messed up is our inability to see how everything is going back into one.
Well, and discernment is huge. I think we all could profit by practicing more discernment on a daily level, right? To be able to
Yes.
before we react, let's just act on something. Let's say, let me process what you said. Let me take it in and say, huh, well, that's interesting. And rather than respond with condemnation, say, well, have you ever considered this point of view? Rather than attacking somebody, be more open to at least consider what they're saying and give it validity, but you don't necessarily have to agree with everything they say. I mean, you look at the world now, we're so full of vitriol. You're either left or right, you're for or against. And we are in a duality 3D environment. That's one of the reasons, at least, that I've heard from people like yourself and people who are in the field, that we incarnated here, because you can tell me how to ride a bike, but until I get on it and fall down and learn how to balance and then master it, I don't really know what it's like. So if you're on the other side where you went, where everything's fine, everything's love personified to the billionth degree, you would like to see, well, what is it like down there? So we choose these roles, I think, personally, to come down here and learn that type of perspective and help push the ball forward.
Yes. Yeah, we do. This whole experience is a progression of consciousness. From the very beginning of life, we start with no knowledge of our experience. And every moment that we have, we start building upon that knowledge. And at the end of our lives, that knowledge in energy form is expressed back into the universe and back into consciousness itself. And so each experience is meant to grow. It's not meant to debilitate. It's not meant to hinder. It's meant to be expressed. And it's meant to be expressed in the most fundamental, life-giving way possible, because the only truth in reality is life and the consciousness and the awareness that's attached to that. There's nothing else beyond that. And this goes back into the truth of what life is. Everything that we do must express life, because we are the living manifestation of what life is. We are crawling out of death into a place of life. Even death becomes the life itself for the spirit, where every experience is necessary for us to access and understand the very next step of our lives and our experience, which is the spiritual
You
world.
guys are helping redefine death. The reality of death is that not what we see it as, a finite dive into the blackness or hell or heaven. It's all that is. If we're a part of all that is, we're always a part of all that is, right? You can't destroy that. But there's a line of demarcation when we come down to this third dimensional level. Because if you run into an object, it's going to hurt. If you face plant with a helmet on after a motorcycle accident, you're probably going to have some injuries.
Absolutely.
And that was directed openly by you. There are, and again, we can get into accidents, but we make those potential realities come into our experience by the way we carry ourselves.
Right. We're like a walking bag of probabilities that we're passing out the absolute in each situation. We're reaching in our bag and saying, how do we want to look at this absolute? And we take action upon that, but everything is a probability until an actuality. And this is why worrying about anything doesn't have any place in my life anymore either, because there's only actualities in life. All the probabilities are out there, but the actuality of your life will always happen. Every actuality will happen, so the only probabilities are in our mind, and it's not a real experience for,
Well, the
fully.
beauty of the system is you get to select, I get to select. I can't select for you unless you give your power over to me. So we have autonomy, we have sovereignty unless we
Yes.
surrender it. How do you deal with skeptics, though? People who, I mean, do you just in the normal course of a conversation when you first meet somebody say, yeah, I had this incredible experience and it changed my purview on life? Or how do you deal with that?
Each person is a new experience, obviously, because each person comes from a lineage of their own information and their own experiences. And so no one's going to fully have an understanding of what I went through. That's the first thing I have to understand. Two is some people are going to be open to it and some people are not, depending upon their journey, their consciousness journey, because that's what we're on. We're on an expanding consciousness journey. The more expansive you are, the more aware you are, the more you're willing to receive information. The less information you're going to receive. And so I just kind of feel people out. Usually I just bring it up randomly, like, yeah, like people are like, hey, how's your day going? I'm like, well, it's great. I had a near death experience and died, 8 years ago, and it's been great ever since. And so people would generally ask me or won't ask me. And if they ask me, then I'm happy to share with them. But I realize that I can't force anybody to listen to my story. I can't force anybody to believe me. I just have to create the experience of my experience through our interaction with them and let them feel how that experience changed me and let them feel like who I am now because of that experience. And usually when I do that, people wonder why I'm so happy all the time. Why is everything okay in my life? Why am I always just finding the joy in life? And when they do, I let them know. And this is what life is. Life is joy. Life, the emotions that we have, the emotion of love is the feeling, I believe, of energetic life being created within us, but it's just the emotion, the chemical emotion of it. And so we feel alive when we're in love, and that's what love is. Love is life, because without love, there's no reason to live. And without, life, there's no way to love. So it must be love as the answer to everything. And love is the feeling of what life feels like generating. And that's what we're meant to be doing, generating a life so that we have more ability to access consciousness through our awareness.
Well, and you were in your story, you said as you were getting ready to exit the experience, you felt a presence behind you, and essentially it said, man, woman, indifferent, whoever it was, angelic guide, God,
Mm-hmm.
go live your purpose, right? So did you discover what your purpose is? And is it more of what you just articulated about carrying yourself this way in life and hoping it spreads to those that you encounter?
Yeah. So after I got done with the color experiences, I noticed that there were some blank pixels that didn't have any color in there, and I knew that that was where I was going to get to put these colors in my future, and I knew I wasn't going to be dead. I knew I was going back at that moment, and then I realized that there was this massive expressive being behind me, and it scared me to the point where, not scared as like worried, but just scared about the immensity of the energy or the power behind me.
And the responsibility you would have.
Yeah, right. And so when I knew that being was behind me, I really understood that it had walked me through this experience, because I would have probably locked myself into different experiences and never left that place. It was the most beautiful, amazing, awe-inspiring place. I saw colors I've never seen before, had emotions I've never had before. But this being had been with me, I believe, the whole way and just pushing me through. And when I had that understanding that I had more life to live, I immediately realized that he's behind me, and immediately it spoke to me telepathically that it's just said, become the purpose. That just those three words, become the purpose. And previously, up until that accident, I didn't know what my purpose was in life. I had no idea. I didn't know what life was. And I knew that I had to immediately start meditating. And I'd been on pain prescription medication from my injury in the military. I knew I had to quit taking my prescription medication, and I had to start meditating. And those were the two things I had to do in order to understand what my purpose was. And I spent the last 8 years studying, understanding life, understanding consciousness, understanding the human experience, understanding quantum theory, understanding biology, chemistry, everything, because it all fits together. And through that process, I've gotten to understand myself. And that's the most important thing, is that when we understand ourselves, we can understand everything that's happening in the universe, because it's the same expression on different levels and different frequencies with different biology, and different components to it. But it's the same thing. It's an expression of life. And that's what we are. We're vessels of expression of life and consciousness into one another.
And so would you say your experience, because I think the definition of a near death experience literally is clinically dead, flatlined, you're in the hospital, you were gone for 6, 12, 18 minutes. Yours would be more akin to a spiritually transformative experience that mimicked a lot of the characteristics of a near death experience? Or how would you describe what you actually experienced?
No, it definitely was out of body experience. I had a whole experience out of my body. I felt things. I was able to look around. It was a definite out of body experience. There's no doubt. I've never had something so real happen to me. And when I came back into my body, once the being or the angel, whatever you want to call it, said, become the purpose, I had that understanding. Immediately, I had this white light hit me, and the white light penetrated me. Like it became me, essentially. And in that light, there was information that I was meant to unlock. And the only way I could unlock that was through meditation and through, the opportunity to get my mind clear about my life. And it literally, it changed my whole life. That one experience, it wasn't just It wasn't just a spiritual shift. It was an entirety of my taste, what I want in life, how I feel about life. It's everything about me has changed. The way I communicate, the way I learn, what I'm talking about now, what I can entertain. Like I can't watch politics anymore. I can't watch TV. I rarely watch movies. I do a lot of reading now. Like it's changed me in every possible way that there is to be changed, and I feel like having that experience and connection to God and through that connection of consciousness just is put me back into alignment with where I need to be in my life and how I need to be cultivating life in every experience.
Well, as you say, you're an emissary of love, right?
Yes, I am the manifestation of love. I just like
Yeah.
we all are. We're all the expression of life, and that is love for sure.
So, for people who have not experienced what you've experienced, and the people that we talk to, we always ask at the end of these shows to give them some type of a primer of what you utilize now to guide you through life. I know you've talked about it consistently through the course of this interview, but if you could leave them with a couple of salient points that they could utilize without having to have the enormity of what you went through, what would those points be?
So number one, that every night we go to bed, we die. That is a death of that day. And every morning that we wake up, we've not made one bad choice, not made one bad decision. And we're in the pureness and perfectness of an open palette to create any life we want it to be that day. And we have absolute control over that. Nothing has to affect us in the next day. When we wake up the next day, we're actually the most intelligent we've ever been because we have the most amount of information embedded within us. And we've accepted the most amount of information. So we're the smartest we've ever been too when we wake up. And number three would be that everything in life has a purpose. Nothing in life happens for no reason. Everything that the leaves fall brings nutrients to the ground gives the nutrients back to the tree. Everything has a cycle as well. And instead of living to die, instead of dying to live, we should be living to die. We should be living our life knowing that our spirit is going to transfer into a new place. There's no doubt about it. There's no belief to be had. That's what actually is happening. And so to understand that your life has its purpose embedded within every breath that you take. That is the breath of God in you. That is the breath of consciousness in you. And using that breath to speak life into people is getting yourself into alignment with what's actually happening in creation. Creation is life itself and the ability to observe life, and so we have control over that. And number four would be that we absolutely have control over our emotions. Like our thoughts create our emotions and our emotions create reactions in the body. But our perception and how we see things is what creates our thoughts, which flows into the emotions. So how we see things will change how our emotions are as well. And we can control the emotions and not let the emotions control us. I always say that if we're not living in truthfully, then we're living in a place where our emotions are dictating our experience. And because emotions come from outside of us, they come from experiences, they come from people. If our life is fundamentally led by emotional interactions, then everybody has control over us and every experience has control over us. And there is no free will in our lives and in our consciousness and in our spirit. And so realizing that we can control the environment, we can control our perspective, and we can control the outcome, and that we have every ability and every power to do so in our minds. For sure, that'd be important.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. In fact, this spiritual discipline I've studied for 30 years says you stand for yourself and against nobody else. I'm not against you, but
Right.
I'm for me, the individual spirit. So if you want to argue with me, that's your prerogative. But then my prerogative is I'm going to take off. I'm not going to participate. But if you want to add something to the day that's positive and aggregate with me an environment that will help lift all of us up, then I'm down with that. I'm completely cool with it. If people want to get a hold of you, I mean, are you writing a book or what do you do for a living now? I know you're helping your brother now, still in construction.
Yeah, so I'm retired from the military, and I've been for the last 8 years. I've been studying consciousness and just doing my own research on it. And I am in the middle of writing a book. I've been writing a book for a couple of years. It's just a slow process, getting everything out. But yeah, so they can contact me on Facebook or Instagram or in my email, and respond to questions and stuff. Or yeah, but
Well,
yeah,
I'll
just
put that in the
living
liner
life
notes.
as much as I can.
No, that's great. And we appreciate your availability And again, I think the beauty of the system of consciousness, whomever set it up, God bless them,
Yes.
because it gives us autonomy. And I think your point was well taken, where you say you have a new opportunity. You don't have to go headlong into the day, bringing the garbage from the day before. If it was a bad experience for you,
Right.
you can sift through that. You can characterize this day as an opportunity for good, because really, if God created the world and it was good, as Genesis says, well, then everything's a lesser sense of good, right? So
Exactly.
just elevate your thought, create a different level of consciousness, and then carry that with you as you go interact with people.
That's it. We're powerful. We can create the realities, and we do create the realities, not only for ourselves, but for other people. And so I always think about what's the greatest interaction I can have with people, what's the greatest impact I can have with them. And sometimes it's just saying hello to somebody. It's making them feel acknowledged. Sometimes it's complimenting an outfit or a hairstyle or just their eyes. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be anything, but just reaching out to people and sharing your life with them and expressing yourself to them is a beautiful gift. And it's something that people do for us every day. And it's really beautiful to see the value in that when somebody gives that to us.
Yeah, and I really believe that goes back to your interaction with the gal at the grocery store that probably at the time felt completely benign. It didn't seem like it was really that earth shattering, but for you to acknowledge her spirit in a way that she felt so good about it, that's what the system's all about, right? That is the life review. That's the value of the life. In contradistinction to that, the kid that you stole the milk from, you were able to enable yourself to see his perspective, which was trying to provide for his family. He wasn't just being a jerk just to be a jerk. He had a motivation behind it. So if we can just step back and be a little more circumspect when we interact with people and not buy into, like you said, the emotional reaction of the moment, we can add those little steps to everybody that we interact with, and then the system works, right?
It does. That's how we hijack the system instead of being hijacked by the system. We take control of our lives. We take control over the impact we have on other people. And again, at the very end of the day, there's only one happening in this experience. It's life itself and the ability for consciousness to continue life. And so just abiding by that rule right there, by loving one another and treating other people how we want to be treated, we're actually giving them abundance as well. And when two or more are gathered together or actually put together just in energy and science as well, when you take two energy streams, you put them together, it magnifies. Same with music. You get the harmonies and you get the extra notes in there. And that is an explosion of energy coming into this place. So loving somebody is going to let them feel something that they can't give to themselves. It comes from an outside source. And that's acknowledgement of the life that they are. I think that's a beautiful way to live life, is every day looking for an opportunity to give somebody an understanding of their expression into this life and how important and valuable they are.
I agree 100%. And I know Jeff Jansen, who's a colleague, and I don't know if you've read his work, but he's got a book called Life's Ripple Effect. And it just talks about all these individual life experiences in life reviews that are similar to what you talked about earlier, on the good and the bad. And it gives us the ability from a visceral standpoint to see if I alienated you. I wasn't aware of it, makes us cognizant of it. So in the future, when we go forward, like you've been talking about, we just pass love off. That's all we're doing all day long. And it doesn't have to be earth shattering. Like you give somebody $1 million, you can compliment a woman in a convenience store, and that made her day. Right.
That's it. The greatest thing you give somebody is a piece of life. It doesn't matter what it is. The greatest thing you give somebody is a smile, because you've generated life in them, and now it has to become an expression. Gratitude that they have is an expression of life being given to them. And so it's something that's very powerful, and it doesn't have to be some grandiose, expression. It can be just a simple thing. And that's what we have access to, but the goal is to have as many amazing experiences and expressions as we can. I think that's the whole point of life, is create experiences that generate and continue creating life in other people and ourselves. There's nothing more to it.
I agree. And I appreciate you adding more life to our channel, because I think this collectively, these stories that experiencers like you and academicians, clinicians all talk about, and then we can bring more people into the fold, especially men, because I think men as a rule, we're more hard-headed. We don't give ourselves an opportunity to emote, because typically, like when I was raised back in the 60s, you were, don't cry, get up, dust it off, don't acknowledge your pain. But let's give men, and women are better at it than we are, the ability to emote. It's okay. It's okay to feel. That's a normal, part of life that you need to integrate into how you carry yourself. So we really appreciate you stopping by today, and I'll put your information in the liner notes, and let's go out and let's make people's life better.
I love it, Mark. Absolutely.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Take care.
Thank you, Mark. You too.
Bye-bye.